Welcome to Everything with Everett. This is a talk show podcast hosted by Everett McConaughey from Boise, Idaho. The purpose of this production is to share thoughts, voices, and information to further a discussion on who we are as individuals, communities, and a global society. Everything with Everett is open to all topics of discussion: faith, science, history, finances, social issues, and, well, everything. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Visit everettpodcast.com for all the details.
Greetings, my loyal listeners and fans. It has been 1 year since I posted a episode on this podcast. April 1st, 2023 was the last episode published date of this podcast, and so much has changed since then. For those of you that don't know, I no longer call my birthplace of Idaho home. In fact, my husband and I moved over 2,000 miles away to an incredibly gorgeous state of Pennsylvania. You should totally check it out. We vacationed here in 2022, and we're absolutely just blown away by the amount of beauty that is just everywhere. Lots of vintageness, obviously. This place is really old, but just absolutely gorgeous. So much more than was ever portrayed in any book or classroom setting that we ever heard about in school. I'm so glad that we were able to afford the logistics of such a monumental move, and that we decided to drive for nearly 5 days across the United States of America. It's a lot of money to ship cars, so we had to choose to drive, and I'm really glad that we did, because there's a lot that you miss when you fly over the country. And when you're driving through every little town and seeing just how interwoven a lot of farmland and city urban spaces are, it hits you differently than when you grow up in the Treasure Valley, Boise, Idaho, and see sweeping farmland on what was once, uninhibited desert, and is now being turned into developments, housing. Lots of people want to live in Boise, Idaho, and it's a nice place if you're into that. If you're wanting to drive an hour away and be in the mountains every weekend, frankly, if you have the money to partake in those extracurricular activities, or if you can afford to buy the house and, amass the camping materials that you need to go out into the wilderness, more power to you. It's an awesome place to live for those things. And I'm not in any way against the state of Idaho. I guess I outgrew it. I would say it no longer is the, static home that I thought it was always going to be for so long. The area fought for legitimate recognition, when Boise State was playing against a lot of national teams and in big conferences, everyone constantly was, one-time success, little underdog Boise State, poor little potato Boise. And for so long, we weren't taken very seriously. And what's kind of interesting is the same people who fought to be recognized on the national football stage are the same ones now that are decrying the mass influx of people. It's like, well, what do you expect when you wanted to be recognized as a legitimate player in many stages? Coming out of the Boise area, you've got Micron, Albertsons, Boise State football is huge. Lots of companies are there, and in many ways, it's a mini Silicon Valley. There's a lot of California money influence, Texas. There's just a lot of outside amalgamation of knowledge that have come into that valley, and in many ways, the redevelopment of everything is related to that. And there's not an inherent value on preserving the past and the history. Whoever has the most money to buy up the land, and there's such a fierce championing of property rights that we don't think about, when those brothers from Texas bought the huge swath of national wilderness in central Idaho, that as property right owners, they could put a gate across the road and you'd never get access to it again, even though for generations you hunted on it and fished. The thought of someone actually exercising those property rights is somehow nuanced and lost to the people who've championed them for so long. And now they're just, baffled why public lands are being, cut off and all these people coming in being like, oh, I bought my own little chunk of Idaho, stay out. What do you expect? So, anywho, but the cool part about driving across the country is that you get to really experience things in a very different manner. And for me personally, I feel like I was able to really more fully understand the, dichotomy of the political discussions that we see nationally. There is a major disconnect from even each half of the country. Obviously, you've got the rural people are fighting for one thing, the city people are fighting for a different stuff. All of it's interrelated, but I can also see the pushback of the rural communities. If something in the city is like, oh, these are the standards of life that you must uphold, it can be hard for those smaller communities to do that because they just don't have the population base at the time to really foster that development. But then when that city develops further, who's not to say that those values shouldn't be applied at a later time, or that we should have, this kind of sliding scale of once you reach this population, here's the standards of income and housing and quality of life that we expect. Like, I think that's really reasonable. And it really, there is room for discussion that regulation does go too far in some areas and not far enough in others. Do you know how naturally green the eastern half of the U.S. is? America's heartland looks like a quilt of farmlands interwoven with towns, cities, and developments. Growing up, I always heard about how populated the eastern U.S. was and how crime was rampant and that it wasn't a desirable place to consider living. So many people, when I've told them that we're moving, they're like, oh, you're moving to the East Coast? Like, oh. And there's so much judgment that oozes with that kind of a thing. And part of me has to wonder, it's very racially diverse, this direction. So is there a racist factor with, if you look up Idaho, it's pretty clear that it's a safe harbor of white supremacy, Christian nationalism. Even though Boise is a very relatively diverse area, especially when you consider it against states like Kentucky. Around Louisville is almost 90% white. But then you look at Boise, Idaho, and it's only 83% white. But then where we're living out here in Pennsylvania, we're down to 53% white. So there's a lot more diversity out this direction, which maybe that's what's being quietly spoken by people out west that are like, oh, you're moving to the East Coast? Oh, bless you. And I, if that's truly what's being an undertone of the discussion, I don't like that. And I don't want to be a part of that. So the opposite has proven true in light of my upbringing, like I just shared with you. I'm very joyful to be among many friends and former classmates who I still am connected to online via social platforms, although decreasing because we all know how polarizing those platforms are these days. But many classmates have found their happiness and awakening outside of the great Western potato. And I'm so happy for all of them. Many have moved to Oregon and California, Iowa, Georgia, Colorado. Wherever you find a kindred spirit in your values, that is a great place to live. Yes, Idaho is a beautiful place. It is full of untamed wilderness that can kill you, and the Sawtooth Mountains are truly a sight to see. But what most don't appreciate is that the populous areas of the state, specifically southwest Idaho, are a high desert. They're about 50 miles away from some of the best winter and summer activities this country has ever witnessed, including geothermal pools and whitewater rafting along rural Idaho highways. Unless you're going to drive hours to go snowshoeing every month or have substantial income to afford the starter home over $500,000, let's not forget that 24 years ago, Idaho was so rural that those same homes were less than $100,000. The real reason I moved, not just because it is becoming more saturated with a mindset that I don't condone, but also I'm never going to be able to own a house out west. It's cheaper to spend $5,000, pack up everything, put it in a pod, move it, drive, find a place, rent a place, and maybe I'll probably be able to buy a house in a year or two. But home prices are significantly cheaper, and there's a lot more history here. Like the craftsmanship on these houses, I can get a house for the same price that I used to be able to get it in Boise. I can get it out here, and it is so much better built out here than it was out west. You know, there's just quick, cheap, dirty construction companies, and out here it's built like your grandfather would have appreciated. Lots of woodwork, thick woodwork, not just a veneer. But Idaho is a second chance for those who came to the game too late in the Las Vegas, Phoenix, Arizona, or Houston, Texas areas. Idaho, for many, is a desert oasis among the Snake, Boise, and Payette rivers. The city of trees I once dreamed of retiring in has sold itself to asphalt demolition and the seeking of legitimacy among national fast food chains like In-N-Out Burger and several others that are suddenly deciding, oh, it's worth our investment to build, after decades of being told, of telling the original populace that Idaho was too far in the middle of nowhere. It's actually 6 hours north of Salt Lake and 8 hours east of Portland. It really is out in the middle of nowhere, but it's nothing to sneeze at. There's a lot of people out there. Now that the birthplace gentrification is nearly complete for many, you'll find a great place to relocate from places like Newark, New Jersey, or anywhere else that doesn't fly the flag of independence as fiercely as you'd like. Idaho welcomes your guns, your radical thoughts, and your support of mega religions interwoven into state laws. Just don't forget, the Republican Congress there does tax you for everything, including your income and the food that you buy for your family. They tried repealing the grocery tax. Everything has sales tax attached to it in Idaho. Plus you pay for your income tax, your property tax. You're taxed on everything. Like, that's the core value of the Republican Party, but they don't want to talk about that. And the governor at the time, Republican Governor C.L. Butch Otter, vetoed what was unanimously passed by the Idaho Congress to repeal sales tax on food items. He vetoed it. So now when you file your taxes, you get a basic like $150 credit, whatever it is, next to nothing. You'll actually still end up spending more in taxes on your groceries than you get back on your taxes. But they try to absolve themselves of any responsibility and negative press by, we give it back to you at the end of your tax filing. And of course, as you and I very widely know, a lot of people don't go to Idaho to be law-abiding, tax-paying people. Just going to say that. The Idaho my grandfather and I were born in was one where the Second Amendment empowered you to take up arms and join your local sheriff or the state's National Guard in the law-abiding pursuit of justice for all. You weren't fighting against the sheriff or fighting against the governor or the president or any other state for that matter. It was a place where your handshake was worth more than the gold in the treasury, and where life, liberty, and freedom for all were the guiding principles of the United States for which we stood. As a multi-generation Idahoan, it saddens me to see the state, who was one of the first to empower women in their right to vote, be among the radical Confederates storming Texas with state troopers to stop immigration under the guise of curbing the flow of illegal drugs into Idaho, or storming the national Capitol on January 6th to subvert the very nation for which we used to pledge allegiance to as children. To make anything great again, you need to spend money on restoration and maintenance. Canals built by wealthy pioneers will eventually dissolve back into barren desert sands if the people who benefit from them don't show appreciation in them through tax funding investments. No single taxpayer owns or pays for an elected official or public entity, but a community united can guide a rogue element or fix an issue if it flies in the face of their core principles. That is, if there are any. We're talking about community values here, folks. If you want your children to have a better life, you have to invest it for and build it for them. You can't wait till the kid's 18 and then decide to erect a library to educate them. They're already now an adult. The whole idea of like, oh, why should I pay taxes for a school system when I don't have children is complete bunk. Our society benefits by the collective knowledge that we gain through giving other people access to the knowledge that used to be only achievable and attainable by the rich, upper class, and wealthy. Our country is built on the values of the people being empowered and not having a ruling class of landlords. A museum housing historical artifacts takes money to maintain, sustain, and ultimately preserve. Nothing is truly esto perpetua for long on its own. That's Idaho's state motto, a Latin phrase meaning let it be perpetual. Yesterday will never be tomorrow. And while it's important to understand the lives of those hundreds of years ago, to deny the historical significance of the lives since is a miscarriage of valuing life while it exists. The most important part of a grave marker is the line that separates the starting and end dates of that soul's time in this place we call Earth. Have you ever thought about many issues in this world? Some people are fighting so hard that life matters so much that all babies must be born. And we have all these values about, birth and death. But suddenly our hands are in the air and we don't have any deciding responsibility in the quality of life that people have access to in between. We talk about Jesus' birth at Christmas. And there's a ton around baby Jesus and how, he was born to save the world. And then we talk about coming up here around Easter, how he died. He was persecuted. He was betrayed. He was nailed to a cross by the Roman Empire, which in many ways mirrors that of the United States of America in many core principles. But we never talk about actually the meat of Jesus's life in between them. in between those two times. There's either crucifix Jesus or baby manger Jesus. There's not the Jesus who saved who the public call the criminal from being stoned to death. There's not the Jesus who fed fish to everybody, including those who brought their own. There was never a question about the values of his teachings. But yet somehow that's lost. We just want to talk about, is it Jesus coming or going? We don't want to talk about Jesus doing. Because that's too much of an inconvenient truth. We must all be present in the world to support the values that we want in this world today. Contrary to the book entitled The Holy Bible, which was written by man, like that or not, it's true. It wasn't written by God. It was written by a flesh and blood person. At least 300 years after this dude called Jesus died. Air quote God. He isn't doing anything meaningful anytime soon. Perhaps Noah's flood was more wishful thinking by those praying for a knight in shining armor to ride to their front door and act in their place. There is, geological evidence of great flooding events. We now know it as Ice Age ending and different things like that. But was there a romantic value assigned of, this magical, mystical creature, God in the sky is acting in our favor finally, and he's wiping out all the bad actors? And why hasn't that happened since? There have arguably been far worse things other than, wasting taxpayer dollars in the temple, stories of the Bible, far more egregious things have happened, and yet this God is absent. Is he powerless? Is he dead? Where's God? Why was it worth him doing a flood back then? But now, y'all have freedom to choose. WTF. So, anywho, just to wrap this up, as for me and my family, we've chosen the beautiful Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We no longer live in the state of Idaho. Pennsylvania is the birthplace of our nation. Pennsylvania is home to countless firsts in addition to the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Pennsylvania is the birthplace of the first hospital, the first university, the first stock exchange, the first lending library, the first lightning rod, roller coaster, revolving doors, the movie theater, Jeep, bubblegum, commercial radio station, the banana split, a superhighway. That would be the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which was the founding principle of our modern interstate system. Little League baseball team, the Slinky, and, of course, the smiley face emoticon. The United States of America started in Pennsylvania. Her values today have aged gracefully, some 248 years later. They aren't the same. They're inspired by the founding, but we weren't a perfect country in 1776. We had slavery. We had issues. We maintained those issues through the 1960s. So to say, it was great back then, we got to go back. No, we don't. It wasn't great back then. It was a great decision to break away from England. It was, America was founded under well-meaning, great principles, but we're a living, breathing existence at 248 years old. There is room for all public discourse here. The state is deep purple, so your voice isn't screaming into the void of the opposing color in a way that it will never be realized in your lifetime. No state is perfect on its own. We all have to fight for the life we want every single day. We must be present in our neighborhoods, our school districts, our county, state, and congressional matters. It is your civic duty. Indifference, inaction is the worst path you can choose. No one is absolved of their actions or inactions related to the human condition. Personally, I want our sons to love who they love and be free to care about others. I want our daughters to be empowered to choose to serve in their church or empower the world through their leadership. Growing up, my mom's number one rule was, your freedom ends where my nose begins. And I've held to those ideals in all facets of life. You can choose to partake in life's offerings or not. But to remove the right of choice from others is the ultimate wrong in this world. Just because you're on a diet doesn't mean you have the right to make pasta illegal for somebody else. You can eat the salad every meal that you like, but for those that want to have spaghetti, they get to make that choice just as much as you got to make that choice previously before the salads. I'll leave you with some final tourism board slogans that hold value in my heart. Pennsylvania memories last a lifetime. America starts here. You've got a friend in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania, pursue your happiness.
Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. In Pennsylvania, we hold these truths to be as self-evident today as they were in 1776. So we've issued a bold new declaration for the 21st century traveler and adventurer: pursue a way. We're calling all history buffs, thrill seekers, culture lovers, and outdoor enthusiasts to find their own personal definition of happiness in Pennsylvania, to shoot the rapids and scale the heights, to hit battlefields, brew pubs, ballparks, and the ballet, to do more, see more, and smile more in every one of the 46,000 square miles that make Pennsylvania like no other state in the Union. No matter who you are, know that in Pennsylvania, happiness is our keystone, and you'll find it in our historic treasures, dynamic urban centers, and greater than great outdoors. Hear that? Happiness is calling from every corner of our warm and welcoming state, because your brand of happiness and every visitor's brand of happiness is now the official brand of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, pursue your happiness.
Thank you for listening to Everything with Everett. Connect with Everett and other listeners on Facebook and Twitter at Everett Podcast. Everett would love to hear from you. Share your thoughts by emailing mystory@everettpodcast.com. You can also leave a voicemail or send a text message to 208-391-2808. Choose to listen, speak with kindness, and have a great day.